Okay, so our next speaker is Pär Holmberg from IFM, where he's an associate professor in economics. And we need to thank Pär for stepping in, or rather flying in at the last minute to cover for Lina, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. Pär is going to be talking about central versus self-dispatch in electricity markets.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. So yeah, this is a joint work together with my colleagues Victor Ahlqvist and Thomas Tangerås, and we are at IFM, Research Institute of Industrial Economics, and we are all economists. So this paper is actually more of a survey paper and fairly policy oriented. So it actually doesn't have any math in it, but still I think it gives some background to this problem and can be a starting point for this type of problem for people who want to develop mathematical models to study this, who want to compare centralized markets and decentralized markets. And at the end of the talk I will also give some thoughts of a type of models that I would like to see for this type of problem. So the paper is about the wholesale electricity market, and the focus is on the day-ahead market. So we will sort of compare centralized and decentralized day-ahead markets. And then, the day-ahead market is the day before delivery, and then the real-time market sorts out problems at delivery, and some markets have also an intraday market in between. But in this talk I will focus on the day-ahead market. And as things are now, it's one could almost say that instead of saying centralized versus decentralized, one could almost say also US versus Europe, because I mean it has not always been like this, but how things look now, then markets in US, they have converged to a market model where the market is centralized, whereas the opposite happened in Europe, where markets have been moving towards decentralized. So what with a centralized market, I mean that the bids are fairly detailed. So there is a lot of the bids to the day-ahead market are fairly detailed. So there are in US there are sometimes three-part bids. So they so they have statements about the marginal costs, startup cost, and no low cost. And then the system operator collects all this information and it clears the market. Trying to maximize welfare, and then it actually takes a decision for each single plant how much it should produce, and then this information is given back to the producers. And Europe is Europe. I mean, there are probably markets which are not exactly like this, but it's more like producers submit. The bid has only one component, so it's sort of marginal cost, and then the system the market operator, I should say, clears the market, and but the clearing is often less precise because in Europe there are often big zones, and the commitment after the day-ahead market in Europe is that each producer is supposed to deliver a certain amount of energy in each zone, but the market doesn't specify which plant should be used and how much should be produced by each plant. So the producers have more, they can decide more exactly how this power will be produced. And it could even a producer could even tell someone else to produce instead and then pay that producer. So it has more freedom in Europe. And so the sort of market operator has less information and more decisions are taken by the producer. So it's decentralized in that sense. the difference between a centralized and decentralized market wouldn't matter so much but there are some imperfections which means that it will matter. And one such, well, so in the ideal market, one would have convex costs, so that marginal cost would be upward sloping, and also the cost for one sort of point of time, production cost for one point of time, would be independent of what happened before and after. But that is not the case, because there are a couple of imperfections, and one of them I've chosen to call economics, or we've chosen to call economics of scope, and that means that actually the production cost at one point of time depends on what's happening before and after, because there's ramping and so there will be ramping costs often. So therefore the production cost at one point of time will sort of depend on what happened before and after. So therefore if a producer wants to produce a certain amount of energy, then the cost for this will depend on what happens before and after, because due to the ramping. So if the producer doesn't know exactly what's happening before and after, then there will be some uncertainties in the cost. And then there can also be non-convexities, so that marginal costs are downward sloping. And if the producer is dispatched at a point here, then where the price is equal to marginal cost, then it will be that the price is not enough to cover these higher marginal costs, therefore the producer can make a loss, so that's also a problem. And there are also other imperfections, but so so the central and the decentralized market, so how do they deal with these problems? So the centralized market, it's so that, well, ideally the market operator, system operator has all the information about these non-convexities and about ramping costs and so on. So, and it clears all delivery periods together. So therefore it sort of has all the information that it needs to make an optimal clearing. And also as it has information about the non-convexities, it can also have side payments to avoid that producers make losses, and these side payments are called uplifts or make whole payments. So in that way the central approach can make sure that there is no loss. The decentralized approach is then the market operator doesn't have full information about the cost, ramping costs and so on. And the other thing is that the producers don't have information about how much ramping is going to be needed, because they don't know exactly how much is going to be produced, how much they will produce at different points of time. So they have sort of to guess how their dispatch will be, and sort of bid, make a guess and then bid the marginal cost after that. But the good thing with the decentralized market is that if a producer makes a mistake in his guess, then he can actually correct it, because it's an intraday market, so it's quite flexible market. So even if the day ahead dispatch might not be perfect, it can sort of correct it in the intraday market. And the non-convexities, producers, they can bid with a markup. In case they are making a loss, they can bid with a markup, so to sort of deal with that problem. I just want to sort of take a bit of a pause here from the electricity markets, because actually this centralization, decentralization is quite a general problem. So every organization sort of have to decide at what level in organization the decisions will be taken. And so there's been a sort of fairly big literature on this more general problem. And then ideally, if communication is perfect, so that for example, the communication is costless and there is no delays and perfect informative, and the person at the top of the organization has sort of unlimited processing capacity and all these things, then obviously it's best to have a centralized, that all decisions are taken centrally at the top. But in practice there is some imperfection, so information is costly to communicate, the information is distorted on the way, and the agents have limited processing capacities and so on. So therefore in practice decisions are often deregulated to further down in the organization. And then exactly how much deregulation there is depends on how big these imperfections are. And if you go back to electricity markets, I will go through this a bit more detail later in the talk, but just here preliminary to give some examples of problems with centralized electricity markets. One problem is that this three-part bids. I mean, that's a rich format, but still it cannot capture all production technologies. So, for example, examples given in the literature is combined cycle gas turbines, CCGTs. They have can sometimes have complicated marginal costs, so so the marginal cost kind of varies in a sawtooth manner like this. And another example is for production hydro plants if a producer has several hydro plants along a river, then production in those hydro plants need to be coordinated, and this is also something that can't be captured by the three-part bids. The other thing with the centralized market is that it's kind of a big problem to clear. It's a complicated problem to clear this type of market, and it's a bit slower and so on. And as far as we know, I mean, we're happy to hear about counterexamples here, but as far as we know, it's many markets in US are two settlement markets. So essentially there's one clearing day ahead, and then there's one clearing in real time, and then intraday there is no proper clearings. At least it's not like intraday prices are calculated. That's how we understand it, at least. So that means also that if there's something happened there in the day-ahead market which was not good, for example, because one has a complicated technology and the bid format didn't really match that technology, then one can't really correct. If one is dispatched at a point where one doesn't want to be, then it's difficult to correct that. Another issue is that about these uplift payments. The problem with them is that even if it's a perfectly competitive market, producers will have incentives to overstate these costs because it's kind of individual payments, and if an offer is anyway accepted, then a producer could sort of overstate its no-load costs or startup costs and so on in order to increase its revenue. And this means also that if the statements of no-load costs and startup costs are wrong, then this means that the operator of the market will receive incorrect information, and therefore the clearing will also not be perfect. As I said here, so it's this talk in this paper is more of a survey of the literature, and we have more policy discussion, and but at the end I will also give some thoughts for further work, more what type of mathematical models which would be of interest for this type of problem. Okay, so now I will go through the centralized market in more detail and talk about advantages and disadvantages. So as I said, there is this three-part bids, and then the system operator receives them and makes a very good clearing based on these three-part bids. And then in case there is anyone who will make a loss due to these non-convexities, then there are special payments for them, which can also be calculated from these startup costs and no-load costs and so on. And then the system operator decides exactly how much should be produced in every plant. And one issue here with the centralized market is that the agreements or sort of commitments of the producers are kind of tailor-made. So I mean the sort of optimal dispatch, it relies on that energy is produced in a particular plant. So because I mean the system operator has accepted that plant because of its special properties, because of its special location, and because of its ramping properties and so on, and marginal costs. So that means it's not easy to replace that unit. And also the payment is tailor-made, so it could be that because of these side payments, it could be that it's a unique payments to sort of different producers. So that means that it's not so easy to sort of trade those agreements in the secondary market. Another thing with centralized markets is that they have often know their pricing, so that means that they often take into account all of the network constraints already in the day-ahead market. And to give some examples of centralized day-ahead markets, they are, I mean, most, as far as I know, all deregulated electricity markets in the US are now can now be considered to be centralized. So New England, PJM, Midwest, New York. California and Texas, they are also centralized now, but in the past they had other designs which were more decentralized. In Europe, the old pool in England, Wales, I'm not sure about Scotland, but that was centralized. So in the 90s, England had a centralized market. If I'm correct, it used to be the same in Ireland, also a centralized market. And Spain has some sort of features of a centralized market as well. And if we look at the advantage with centralized markets, well, the good thing is as long as these bids are truthful and can sort of represent the technologies in a good way, then it will lead to an optimal or nearly optimal day-ahead clearing. And also it's easy to use for producers because as long as they want to bid truthfully, they can just look at their own cost and make bids. They don't have to care about or predict how much ramping there's going to be or other things. So they can just bid their own costs. But if you look at this advantage here, then it's more this thing with inflexibility than it's a big clearing algorithm, which is not so easy to sort of compute over and over again. And as far as we know, it's only two clearings, so it's the day ahead and the real time. So that means that I mean, if there are updates in the wind power prognoses, for example, then I mean that can be corrected in real time. But there's no sort of no intraday prices which can guide producers to whether they should update their production decisions and so on. And the other problem here I mentioned was that earlier that it might be that the three-part bids are not sufficient to give a good description of all technologies. And also if there are new technologies which should take part in the markets, for example storage, demand response and demand shifting and so on, then one would need to develop new bidding formats for those technologies as well. Another thing is that there is some aspects of a pay-as-bid auction in centralized markets, at least as they are organized today, and the reason is this uplift payments, because the uplift payments are based on producers' own statements of their costs, a startup cost and no-load cost. So, and even if the market would be perfectly competitive, if they would increase their statement of these costs, then that would sort of directly influence the payments they get. So that in that sense, it's a pay-as-bid auction, at least partly pay-as-bid auction. And this is good in some aspects because the experience from theoretical studies of pay-as-bid auctions is that it reduces the risk of collusive outcomes. I mean, meaning that firms sort of cooperate about the price, implicitly, and this risk is lower in a market with pay-as-bid auctions. But there are also disadvantages. One is then that the costs are not correctly stated, so that the system operator will get the cost will be overstated, and no-load cost and startup cost will be overstated. So that means that when the system operator makes the clearing, he makes it based on incorrect input data. And it's also been shown that in pay-as-bid auctions there's a higher risk of having randomized bidding, kind of volatile bidding, and this can also cause welfare losses. And another problem is that if everyone gets individual payment, then it's difficult to create contracts which can be used for hedging, because everyone sort of has different payments. So it's difficult to get good hedgings then. A third problem is about these uplift payments. So I mean, that money has to come from somewhere. Someone has to pay. I mean, the producers get these uplift payments, and someone has to pay it. And so, I mean, one have to introduce some tariffs or taxes that so that one can sort of get the money. And this means that even if it would be the case that the day-ahead dispatch as such would be perfect, it maybe without any welfare losses at all, it would still be that when one want to sort of get this money with tariffs or taxes, then that procedure will introduce welfare losses. So as a whole, there will still be welfare losses in the clearing. But then the good thing with the centralized market is that one can sort of choose tariffs and taxes in a clever way in order to make those welfare losses small. So it may not be a disadvantage. And the fourth problem here is that it's a big, complicated clearing to clear a big market with no other prices, taking into account all ramping costs and so on. So so that means that the clearing becomes a bit iterative, and one can't sort of clear the market exactly, but it's more of an approximate clearing, and it will be somewhat arbitrary exactly which bids are accepted in the end. At least for bids which are close to being accepted or rejected, there it will be some randomness in which bids are accepted, and ex post it could be difficult for a bidder to understand why his bid was accepted or rejected. So it means that it becomes a bit of a black box, and so the trader has to be really, they have to really trust this algorithm and sort of think it's a good algorithm. Okay, so that was centralized market, and in the decentralized market then each producer, they don't. So the centralized market, then producers make a bid for each plant, specifying this startup, marginal cost, and so on. But in a decentralized market, then producers, they make, it's more like a portfolio, so they just give for each zone, for each area, they give a marginal supply curve, and they don't say which plants sort of this correspond to, so they're kind of free to if they're supposed to deliver a certain amount of energy, they can do it in the way that they find best. Yeah. So some examples of the decentralized market. There's the Nordic market, Nord Pool, and many other markets in Europe. In UK, the new design is, I said before that it was centralized in the 90s, but the design now is decentralized. In Texas and California, it's the other way around, that they used to be decentralized and now they've switched to more centralized. I must admit I'm not 100% sure about Australia, New Zealand and Chile, but my understanding is that they can also be categorized as decentralized markets. One can also say here that UK was, in the beginning, when it became a decentralized market, after the reform, it was, in a sense, extremely decentralized, because I mean, in most decentralized market, the sort of regulator would say, okay, you need to, there needs to be a day-ahead market and perhaps also some intraday market. But in UK, it was sort of in the beginning, it was very decentralized, and sort of the market participants, they kind of sort of had to, or they had to figure out themselves sort of how to trade among each others. How to do that. So also that decision was sort of decentralized to the market. How to organize trading. And my understanding also New Zealand is also fairly decentralized in that sense, that at least what I've heard is that it's more kind of purely financial market until delivery. So it's so no sort of physical commitments in the day-ahead market and so on. So in that sense, it's also decentralized. On the other hand, New Zealand and Chile, they are more central in the sense that they have nodal pricing. So like many centralized markets. Nord Pool also has some central aspects in that in other European markets, in that they have block bids, and that means that producers can specify a block for a time period, and then for a long, which could span several delivery periods, and then it can say you sort of either you have to accept all of this block, or you have to reject all of it. So you can't partly accept this block, and that means that producers can sort of have control that if they're accepted, then the money that they are paid, they will cover all. I mean, so essentially, if the plant is started, then it will run for a certain amount of time, and then it knows that this will be enough to cover the startup costs. So Nord Pool, in that sense, Nord Pool is centralized, and that also means that Nord Pool also is a bit of a black box thing that is complicated to clear, because these block bids, they kind of connect the different, when one wants to clear Nord Pool, one can't clear each delivery hour separately. One have to sort of, due to these block bids, one have to sort of clear the whole market at the same time. But in other aspects, even if one have these block bids, in many other aspects, the Nord Pool behaves like a decentralized market. And the problem here with the decentralized market is that producers, when they make their bids, they don't know exactly how they will dispatch, and they don't know how much ramping they will need or the ramping cost that they will have. So therefore, they have to make some guess of that before making their bids. But and probably the guess will be somewhat wrong, but then they can correct that in the secondary market or intraday market. And also the guesses would be better if there would be sort of financial forward prices for each hour before the day-ahead market, so that producers have a good indication from the market exactly or roughly what the prices will be in the day-ahead market, because then producers can also predict how they will be dispatched. About these non-convexities, then for example startup costs and so on, then producers need to put a markup in order to avoid losses, and these markups will introduce welfare losses, and as I said, there was also welfare losses in the centralized case, but probably they are worse in the decentralized approach, because in the centralized approach one has more control over how to bring in this money, and then one can probably design it in a way which reduces the welfare loss. And personally I think the main problem with the decentralized market is this zonal pricing, and especially for large zones, because it means that the day-ahead clearing will not take, I mean now it's maybe changing here with the flow base, but in the past it was simply that the producers or the market operator neglected transmission constraints inside the zones, and the zones could be large, it could be like the whole of Germany, so one could sort of neglect all transmission constraints inside Germany. So that means that there had to be a lot of corrections then in real time when suddenly one have to consider the transmission constraints. And that it's costly to make sort of adjustments at the late stage. Another problem with zonal pricing is that as one sort of set the price differently in the day-ahead market and in the real-time market, because the day-ahead market neglects some constraint, means prices will be different, and these price differences can be predictable sometimes. Or that means that it gives producers arbitrage incentives. So if producers know that one market will have a higher price than the other, then they will use that information and sort of trade on it, and that could means that producers can end up with very extreme positions because they want to sort of trade on this arbitrage, make this arbitrage profit as large as possible. And one problem with that is that this increases the turnover in real time, because then one have to correct even more in real time to sort of get rid of these arbitrage strategies. And also it will also distort price signals and investment signals, because this means that firms who are in an area where the price should be low, they can suddenly earn more money, and then people will invest where they shouldn't invest. But this can be this problem can be mitigated if one makes zones smaller, and perhaps also if one uses flow-based. I think that's also a better way of dealing with transmission constraints in the day-ahead market. And the fourth problem is that, well, the good thing with this intraday market is that producers can correct mistakes. If there was something, if they were cleared in a bad way, they can correct it. But sequential trading also means that there's a higher risk of having collusive outcomes. That sort of one get producers will sort of cooperate with the price, or implicitly cooperate, tacit collusion. So that's one problem. Another problem is that uniform pricing or having a market price is also not so good to prevent collusive outcomes. As I said before, pairs bid. This is actually one good thing with the pairs bid auction, which the centralized approach is closer to. That it reduces the risk of having collusive outcomes. Okay, and here is the list then of advantages for the decentralized markets. So the advantage then is that the commitments are to deliver energy in a zone, and this is a sort of standardized product which can be traded easily in an intraday market. And that's good also for wind power updates and so on, that one can easily update positions when the wind power prognosis changes, and also electricity prices will be updated. And also, if producers have a complicated technology like CCGT or so, then they might be in the day-ahead market. They might be cleared at the point where they don't want to be, but then they can correct that in the intraday market. They can also correct it internally, that if they have many plants to play with, they can sort of a bit work around the worst imperfections. And another advantage is that the decentralized markets, they have a well-defined market prices, so it's that's also good for financial markets, that they have sort of well-defined spot prices, which could be location-specific, but still it's sort of easy to hedge prices and so on. And also decentralized markets are day-ahead market is fairly transparent, and sort of ex post producers can understand why their offers were rejected or accepted. Another thing, we didn't really address it a lot in the paper, but I thought it was still interesting. And one thing with the centralized markets is that the system operator is involved already in the day-ahead market, and that means also that it's not proper that the system operator should own the network, because then he could sort of, when he clears the day-ahead market, he could sort of influence his congestion rents. So therefore in US, the system operator is always an independent system operator who can't own any assets, neither in the, well, no production plants or no transmission lines. In Europe, that's not, I mean, there are examples where one has such separation in Europe also, but often it's the case that the system operator both operates the system and owns the network. And because that is less of a problem, as it's not involved in the day-ahead market, so it can't influence the day-ahead clearing, so it can't sort of manipulate the market in order to increase its profits. So this could potentially be an advantage of the decentralized markets, but on the other hand, UK has chosen to separate this ownership anyway, so maybe that's perhaps it's the best solution even for a decentralized market. I should also mention some. The stuff I'm talking about is more qualitative. I mean, advantages, disadvantages with different approaches, and then there's a few attempts which look at trying to quantify these differences. And there's one model by Siosanso and Nicholson, for example, where they look, but I mean, it's a complicated problem, and they have to look at a really simple problem, so it's a duopoly, and yeah, I think each firm has sort of a plan each. And what essentially what they find is that the markets are more or less the same. I mean, it gives the same expected profit, but the thing with the decentralized market is that it has this the higher risk of having collusive outcomes. So it's a possibility of having collusive outcomes in the decentralized market. And one can, if you're familiar with the auction models, then one can say here that essentially the stuff that Siosanso and Nicholson did is quite similar to work by Natalia Fabra, where she compared uniform and pay-as-bid auctions. It's kind of the same intuition. It's the same there in her paper, that uniform and PS bid auctions are essentially the same, but then the problem with the uniform auction is that there's a higher risk of having this collusive outcome. And then there have also been empirical comparisons. So Zhang, he evaluated the redesign of Texas when Texas went from decentralized to centralized market. And they find that having a centralized market was 0.5% more efficient. And there's also another paper by Sanikau et al. That finds that spot prices were reduced by 2%. But this indicates that the Texas reform overall, it was a good reform. But on the other hand, it was a lot of stuff that happened at the same time. So it was not only about centralization, but Texas also went to know their pricing, and they also shorted the delivery periods to 5 minutes. So it was other things that happened as well. Yeah, so there have also been other simulations, but I think as an economist, I think it's when one compares market designs, it's important to use Nash equilibria. I mean, meaning that the producers, they will make their bids to maximize profits, and sort of not to assume that they will be nice and just bid their marginal cost. Even if it's a competitive market, it can sometimes happen that producers will still not bid their marginal cost. So in order to make comparisons of centralized and decentralized markets, I think it's good to use Nash equilibria to predict bidding behavior, exactly as Siusanse and his co-author Nicholson did. So that's good. But I think a good model should also have some market uncertainties, because otherwise it becomes fairly straightforward that the markets are market designs will behave similar. But the problem with the decentralized market is when there is market uncertainty. So therefore it's good to introduce that to see, so one can sort of analyze the drawbacks of a decentralized market. On the other hand, it should also be a sequential game, because that's the advantage with the decentralized market is that it can correct mistakes later in the market, in the intraday market. So therefore, the game should have some possibility to correct mistakes. So this would be, I think a good theoretical model to compare this market design and see under which circumstances models work better. So I don't know how am I with time, or? Okay. So so I will anyway conclude here. So I can repeat some stuff. So the centralized market, it should be that they work better if lots of ramping costs and startup costs and so on, and if these can be well described by the bids. I mean, probably the centralized market would be better to deal with these problems. I can also say that in Nordic countries we had a decentralized market, but that also we don't have much problems with startup costs and no costs. So then centralization is less useful. I don't really understand why, perhaps there are such examples, but I don't really understand why the centralized market doesn't have repeated clearing intraday, because that would be better, especially if there is a lot of wind power, so that there has to be a lot of corrections in the market before delivery. And this has been suggested also by Herrero and co-authors. With the centralized market, it has this issue with the tariffs, but on the other hand, to cover the uplifts, but on the other hand, these tariffs can be chosen cleverly to reduce welfare losses, so maybe this could be an advantage. And if we look at the decentralized market, then at least our feeling is that, of course it's good that in markets where there is no startup cost, but we also think that it's could be good in markets where it's a lot of wind power, so that one has to do a lot of updating due to this. And to make the trade they had clearing better, it's good to have forward prices for every hour before the clearing, in order to so that producers can better guess, so there's less uncertainty and producers can better guess the prices and how they will be dispatched. Also, we think that the main problem with decentralized markets, as they are often organized now, I mean there are exceptions, but in Europe especially, is that the zones are too large, so they should be smaller. Or one should have this flow-based, which the European Union is working with. So I said there that intraday trading is good with decentralized markets, but on the other hand, it also increases the risk of getting collusive outcomes. And another thing with intraday trading is that many European countries have continuous intraday trading, but actually that's not. We don't think that's really very good, because first it would be better for liquidity to have more discrete auctions, discrete intraday auctions, and also discrete intraday auctions would also treat interzonal transmission capacity more efficiently. So that's also an issue. Okay, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
I really have two comments. I'll give one and then wait my turn. But the thing I think maybe I'm surprised you're not emphasizing, given your affiliation, is risk. The most efficient generators today, gas turbine generators, cost $1 billion, and they're a gigawatt, and you're stuck with them for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
And how on earth would anybody buy one? So I've asked, I don't know if Hung Po is still here. I mean, PJM is proud to say, yes, we have the most efficient generators in the world. The only reason they have them is that they're bilateral contracts, so they can hedge against that risk. If they were stuck with these LMPs, they would never buy one. There's just too much risk. You're stuck with 30 years. And that's the thing, is that most of the trading is not done in these, Wild West auctions. It's bilateral contracts, so they can hedge against risk. So that's just a huge elephant in the room.
Yeah.
And it's never discussed for some reason.
So what you think, or you're saying it's because I would also say one difference with centralized markets is that the system operator or the regulator is kind of involved long before delivery, and they have these capacity auctions where they kind of buy capacity and so on. So that's kind of what you're.
Well, no, I'm just saying it's just the biggest problem with this way of thinking of having an auction every hour is that somebody has to spend that $1 billion and they're stuck with it for 30 years. I mean, why would they do it? I mean, their fuel costs might be about comparable to their cost of their equipment, and so for me, my belief is that it was a mistake from the beginning, and it's empirical as well. After moving to Florida recently, they have the best infrastructure, the lowest retail prices, and it's a duopoly, and it's because they can do the long-range planning. They say, the CEO who says, well, we're going to be stuck with it for 30 years, we'll invest in this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely agree that investments and this long-time risks are really important, but we didn't really address them in this paper. We had more a short-term view. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So you've reviewed experiences over the quarter century or so with different type of markets, but I'm more interested in the future. What will happen in the next quarter century? And we've had in this workshop discussion about the effects of renewables, because all the markets are based on the marginal cost theory and basically depend on the gas or coal unit setting the marginal price. What will happen with 100% renewables? There is a workshop here in a couple of weeks' time with the cost curves becoming very flat, how the markets would work and how people would recover their investments. So any thoughts about that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think first, I think renewables, I mean, in the short term, it would be, I think in centralized markets, they should have more clearings, so that the intraday market, so that the more, intraday prices varies with the wind power prognosis. And for the long term, yeah, I mean, I agree again that investments are really important. And
what kind of markets would it be, just to cover for this future world of renewables?
Yeah,
Those kind of markets, I don't think they would work.
well, I guess I'm less skeptical, but what some markets are doing is to have these capacity auctions, so that they have sort of people get paid to invest, basically, or to have capacity available, even if it's not used. So that would be, but actually I'm less worried. But so I think, I mean, it could happen. I mean, the problem is that one needs scarcity for the price to jump. So I mean, and from a welfare perspective, that's fine. But the problem is, will people sort of, or politicians, can they live with that sort of? So I think I'm more worried about that. So and if they can't live with it, then one would have to set a lower price cap, and one would have to have more capacity payments. So that's. I think it's well. I don't see it as a very big problem. But on the other hand, I haven't. Yeah. So maybe I've been looking more at the studying short-term problems more. So.
Pär, you've given a very good theoretical set of reasons why it's not obvious which one is better. And you've also pointed out that the only empirical evidence we have is flawed because they changed everything else at the same time, so you can't tell what the benefits came from. And I want to propose that the island of Ireland, the single electricity market, has just changed from an audited bid, very transparent, centrally dispatched system for which we have all the data on all the plant, to the European energy-only market, although they do have a capacity auction payment as well, for which it should be possible to simulate the results of the new market with the old data and make a direct comparison. So I would propose that as a really interesting empirical test.
Yeah, definitely.
At least for that particular market.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. Good idea.
Sure.
I mean, the second comment was related to Janus's last comment, that you know, so if you look at the Bonneville Power Authority area and you look at their balancing reserves, if you look over a week, it's zero mean. And that's what's being, and so a parallel universe would be ERCOT in Texas, where they deal with that volatility by having a real-time market. Well, if we know that that deviation is zero energy, why are we calling it an energy market? You know, why are we looking at, you know, why? It's a control problem, and you've got, what you really want is generation to ramp up, ramp down, ramp up, ramp down. You see that zero mean. So why do we create a construct of an energy market when it's not? There's no, net energy is zero.
Balancing market.
It's zero, that's right, but we're calling it energy. And we're calling it, but it's not AGC, I'm talking about every 15 minutes, we have an auction. And it's called an energy market, and marginal cost is what's being used as a benchmark. In the United States, you talk to Dick O'Neill, the chief economist. He says the only reason we have a real-time market is to validate the day-ahead market, and he says it's an energy market, but it's not. It is purely balancing, and it should be recognized that it's nothing to do with energy.
Europeans call them balancing.
Yeah, but the United States, the thing is that Europe is borrowing flawed ideas from the United States.
Oh, we make up our own.
Yeah, you can do it for it. But it's not energy. It's flaps on an airplane. And so that's why, you know, we have to rethink this. You know,
We need
it's
more
not
control.
easy. What?
We need more control engines.
We do, and we need a bit more economists that have a broader point of view than just competitive equilibrium theory. That's. Do you agree, David?
Well, we've always been sceptical about perfectly competitive electricity
Yeah.
markets. We think of them as imperfectly
But who's we?
competitive.
Who's we? Not in the power sector.
No, economists as opposed to engineers.
Yeah. No. The power economists only talk about competitive equilibrium theory.
No, because those are the only ones they consult.
This is recorded.
Joe.
I was, so for example, the first point on this slide is decentralized markets tend to perform better in markets with considerable amounts of renewables because you can update intraday. But conclusions like this seem a bit fragile to the way that the centralized market performs its dispatch, for example, or technical rule changes in a centralized market that allow ramping products or more ways for participants to express time coupling and so on. So, is it, I mean, which of these conclusions are sort of inherent to the decentralized structure and which of them are specific to the rules we happen to have today?
The reason I say this is that the decentralized markets is more flexible, so it can kind of more quickly update the intraday prices.
You can, I mean, the ISO in the US can do something new every 5 minutes.
But not the intraday market, I think. At least that's. I know that one can have delivery periods which are short. I mean that one can have both in decentralized and centralized. But in the when sort of clearing the market, sort of. My understanding is that the US it's a 2 settlement market, so it's kind of a day ahead, real time, and then it's there are no new settlements intraday. So even if there would be a new wind power prognosis coming in like 6 hours before delivery, then there wouldn't be a new intraday price.
Thank you. Let me just bring up one question that I see them missing in the last slide, and you mentioned a nodal pricing, but I think the question here is about, again, going back to the long-term investment in the restructured market. Where is the transmission? How will the market provide signals in a way that actually can facilitate more efficient coordination between the generation and the transmission investments? Because I think I remember that earlier in the U.S., Paul Josko and Schmelinzy wrote a book together, and this actually looms large at that point. They actually spelled out that coordination between the transmission and generation is a necessary condition for this restructuring to be successful. And here, 20 years, more than 20 years later, where is that now? What's your view on that?
Well. I mean, so first here, I would just say in the decentralized market, the first thing would be to have sort of smaller zones so that the prices are more reflective of scarcity which exists in the market. But coordination. I mean, I guess in now I'm not. This is not quite. What I know very well, but I would say in Europe, I guess it's more of a governmental problem. This thing with the investment into infrastructure, so they sort of would do that. But exactly how they would coordinate with the producers, I mean that's a very good question, but I can't really say anything good about that.
It is difficult. I'm not sure there is a clear, simple answer to that. I think at least that in this, in the centralized sort of structure, there is an attempt to explicitly recognize the locational differences in the generators and produce nodal prices in such a way. I think that the reason that we have nodal prices differences in the U.S., we have a day-ahead market, and to put that actually the transmission rights in the day-ahead market, not in real-time market, is to facilitate hedging. And so that in the long term, Now that can be a foundation, can be a contract. So once supply and demand, they wanted to write the bilateral contracts in a longer time frame. They have a commodity, they have an instrument to help them hedge, because the buyer and sellers are located at different places, and now that the transmission nodal price difference provides a hedge that facilitates that trading. I think that is one of the elements I didn't mention. Maybe it's worth mentioning that is, that is, I'm not saying that this will tilt this one way or the other, but that is an important consideration in terms of investment. Because a generation investment, there are a lot of details, but overall the most important thing from the regulatory perspective is to shift from cost plus service to shift the risk to the investors on the supply side. And as long as the rules are clear and there are sufficient devices to facilitate bilateral contracts in the forward market sense, and that will facilitate hedging and facilitate investment. And so far, I think the U.S. experience after 20 years is that probably is the single most important accomplishment of the market, because it can happen. It can attract a large amount of new investment. And today, actually, the new investment, in the old days, the most of the investment was from the incumbents. Now, at the beginning, I would say probably 80% of the new investment was really incumbent. And today, actually, 80% was the new IPPs and the commercials. Now, that big shift in the big picture of these things, that's probably the most important sort of jump to that, so that we will not go back, not going to go back to the cost of service regulation.
No, but I think also what you said. I mean, I'm also in favor of small zones or nodal pricing. I think that's for Europe. I think that's also what the International Energy Agency said, that in Europe what has to be sorted out is these zones to make them smaller or reflect congestion better.
We'll take one last question.
It's an observation, really, and that is the centrally dispatched pool models that I'm familiar with don't just restrict themselves to the 3 parameters that the energy-only Euphemia uses. They have, I think the pool had something like 32 technical characteristics, all of the ones that were used in the centrally controlled CEGB. And that means that during the course of the day, you know what is the least cost way of correcting deviations from what you thought the day ahead. And you can calculate the cost of those. So that you have, in principle, the same advantages of full information for dispatch during the course of the day, whereas an intraday market is just whoever happens to be sitting in front of their computer screen at the moment, making guesses on what they can get away with. So it's not at all clear that that distinction favors the decentralized market.
Okay, on that thought, I think we'll close. Thank you.